Hello and welcome again to my show, Searching for Integrity. My name really is John Smith, and I'm searching for people with integrity. Why? Because our country suffers from IDD, Integrity Deficit Disorder. We have today Dr. David Alfery, MD, who has his book with him, I hope, Saving Grace, what patients teach their doctors about life, death, and the balance in between. Are you there, David?
I'm here. Hi, John. Thanks for having me on.
Good. Yeah, I love it. Before I used to have a dial-in show, and now I get the Zoom. I get to see people now.
Yes.
So it's a good thing, and I went through in terms of trying to get a feel for you and for the book, and I began with your reviews. You had some outstanding reviews, and there was one item that struck me overall. Let me get my stack. Okay, I guess I won't do that one. It was the quote out of Hebrews. Unbelievable. It happens.
I've got the quote. I can find the quote.
Okay, yes, it up front, the one that's up front.
All right, this is from Hebrews 4:16. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need.
Right, and that day will come, and it may come more than once, but it struck me quite a bit in seeing that. And I'm glad you had your book handy. I've just got papers. Now, let's see. Usually I'm a table of contents guy. You know, I hit the table to hit the chapters, and I learn a lot from that and about the book from that. And you've already done that. I think what you said was that what unites these chapters is that each explores a component of makes all of us human. And when I was going through this and going through the table of contents or the chapters, I was thinking to myself, you know, he stole my thunder. But it was fantastic, and it is. It was. Did you have to cut them back? Did you have to add them more? How did you deal with those in terms of
In terms of what?
Well, in terms of the chapters, yeah.
Yeah, I said about I had a 36-year career as a cardiothoracic anesthesiologist, and when I retired, I realized that nobody had ever written about what goes on in the operating room from the perspective of the people at the head of the table. And that was really surprising to me because the original discovery of general anesthesia in the mid-19th century is considered by many to be the most significant advance in medicine ever. And there have been plenty of books written by surgeons, but none by an anesthesiologist. So I set about to just sort of reveal this secret world that I worked in for 36 years. And as I wrote about it, there were a number of things that happened in my career that I wanted to talk about because they were just so significant. And as I wrote about them, I realized that while I'm describing taking care of patients, what I'm really describing is what I learned from those patient interactions. That's how we got the subtitle of the book. And I just sort of went through the progression of my career from a pretty naive and immature young man as a medical student to hopefully having some wisdom and maturity later on in my career. And it was just a natural progression of the things that I learned, from how you need to take care of patients with respect, treat people with dignity, and so forth, and all the way to later in my career, and understanding how when we have grief that we can share grief, and that lessens our grief.
Sure. Have you did you spend a lot of time writing the book? When did you first to sit it down?
Unfortunately, yeah, I'd spent 6 years writing it.
Boy.
And, if you're not on a social platform, it's very difficult to get any traction. And I worked with a number of agents, and we modified it, changed it. And after 6 years, this is what we ended up with.
Right.
Far better than what I had in year one, I can tell you.
Absolutely. Well, I'm an author as well. And I spent 30 years in throwing notes in a box.
Yes.
And finally, I had to come to Jesus, I guess is a good point to put it. And it reminds me of that. And the first one I like, respect. RESPECT.
That's the foundation of everything in medicine, I think. I make the point in the introduction that a lot of medical students. I had a daughter who's actually a child psychiatrist now, and when she was in medical school, I said, Jana, you're going to find the classmates fall into one of two groups, and you sort of start medicine thinking that the patient is there for you, but as you evolve, if the really good doctors realize, no, you're there for the patient. And it all comes down to that human bond that we have with patients. And the basis of that is treating them with respect and with dignity.
Well, you can take the squad here and have it led by respect. I like that. Next, of course, is dignity. It's to me, people are sick and they're hurting, and you don't know what to do, or you know what to do. You're the guy that fixes things like that. But it's one you got to talk about.
Yeah, and I had a great demonstration from a chief resident that I had when I was a surgery intern at the University of Kentucky. On my the second month of my internship, we had a little baby we're operating on who died on the table, which is about a year old. And it was about a 6-hour operation, very tragic. And the attending left, and the chief resident is closing the chest, and I'm cutting the sutures for him. And you'd think, well, we're going to close quickly and let's get out of here. It's just been a bad experience. But the way I get teary when I tell you about this, the way he closed the chest was so meticulous. And when he closed the skin, he used a subcuticular stitch. That's the stitch that we use for the absolute best cosmetic closure. So there'll be hardly any scar, as if this little girl 16 years later would be on the beach in a bathing suit.
Oh boy.
And he treated her with such dignity that it was just, I just learned that, you know what, you respect all patients. If they're alive, if they passed away, you have to show that essential respect for human beings.
Right. It's a good way to put it too. Next item, paralysis. Is that always a surprise?
Paralysis is, it's interesting. I talk about an episode where, as an intern, I'm called to a very sick patient on the floor. And for about 30 seconds, I sort of stumbled through not knowing what to do. And then finally realized I was over my head and said, call Dr. Carter. He was the guy ahead of me. And he came in and he knew exactly what to do. He took command. It saved the patient's life. And there's a transition. If you work in acute care medicine, there's a transition that you go through where when you see something that looks bad, you've got to realize it is bad and you've got to act. You can't be paralyzed. And if you can't do that, then you can't be in acute care medicine. You've got to go into psychiatry or internal medicine or something where you don't have to like make immediate life and death decisions.
Well, I'm looking forward to your book. In your history, you ended up first off as a BA in English. Is that what you did
Yes,
first?
that gets back to the immature part. I went down to Tulane University and I was pre-med, and I started working in the French Quarter as a bartender at age 19. And I had too much fun doing that. And I realized, gosh, you've got to really study to be in pre-med. So I gave that up and ended up with a degree in English, graduated, and then realized, you better grow up. And you really do want to become a doctor. So I had to go back and take the pre-med requirements for 2 years.
Yeah, but you also became a successful author.
Well, I wrote a lot while I was as a doctor, a lot of chapters and journal articles and that type of thing. But boy, writing a book like this is so different.
Yes. It's a way you put it in terms of if you don't get it, it'll get you.
Yeah, and I really wanted something that would bring tears to the eyes in some chapters, that somebody would finish a chapter and say, well, you know what, I'm going to just read one more before I go to sleep. I wanted something that really puts you in the operating room, the drama of the job that I had.
Sure. Chapter 4 is about trust.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember what that chapter's about. Well, I'm sorry.
Well, that's all right. We can talk about integrity.
No,
trust.
You learn to do procedures as a resident, and then you go into practice, and there's a bunch of things you've never done before. And I had a patient come in for a cervical epidural. Now, you've heard about epidurals for labor and delivery. That's put in the lower back. When you put them in the neck, it has some really hazardous complications that would be paralysis if the needle goes too far. You could actually kill a patient. I'm sorry for that dinging. It's people texting. And I had a patient, I'd never done the procedure before, and she had come in for another doctor to do it. And I said, well, I'll get you ready. And I got her ready and said, well, Dr. Bob will be here in a week. And she said, well, you're here. Why don't you do it? And I confessed to her that I'd never done it before. I'd seen it, what the complications were. And she said, well, I'm game if you are. And that gets to just the amazing thing that happens in medicine, the amount of trust that people put in their doctors who 10 minutes before were absolute strangers.
Right.
And I was always amazed as an anesthesiologist. We often would see our patients in the holding areas, and 10 minutes later, we're going to take them closer to death than they'll ever come in their lifetime and bring them back. And they just implicitly trust us. It's just such an awesome responsibility to have that.
Yes, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. How about the suffering? Is that something that I don't go for, suffering?
Yeah, when physicians treat pain patients in the hospital, let's say end of life treatment, when they run out of all the tricks for taking care of pain, they call the anesthesiologist. And we got called for a patient who was really at end of life and was suffering, and they couldn't control his pain very well, but the family was suffering just as much. And my treatment was as much treating the family as it was to treating the patient. And the lesson in that chapter was I learned that, you've got to, it's not only the patient that you're dealing with. you've got to be cognizant of what's going on with the family and include them in the process.
Certainly, certainly. Faith is a big position. Either you have it or you don't, I think, in a sense.
Yes, and I grew up in a faithless family, in really an atheist family, and I married a very devout Christian, and I kind of wandered for years, and I was in medicine and seeing a lot of tragedies and couldn't make sense out of it. I'm thinking, if this is what we're here for 70 years and then we're gone, why take the trip? Why bother? And when I was in my early 40s, I was baptized, became a Christian, and the faith chapter is really just about that part of my life.
Right. What's a special part? For me, it was.
Well, thank you.
Fragility.
Yeah, fragility is a really special chapter to me, in that we were dealing with a patient who had a cardiac arrest in the operating room. And just by doing some special techniques in the ICU, he was able to survive. And he just beat all the odds in his survival. There's something called the cumulative act effect, or the Swiss cheese effect, which is when you have all sorts of safety layers that, like a Swiss cheese, and they all line up because they've all been missed, and a little arrow goes through and causes injury to a patient. And I think that sometimes with patients that survive against improbable odds, it's the same thing happening, but just in reverse. The chapter is really just about how fragile things are and how easily they can tip over to the side of success or failure.
Right. And followed by expectations. Everybody has an expectation.
That's really special to me. I was really privileged to go on a bunch of medical missions, and went on a bunch of Operation Smile missions with one of my partners. And we had some patients that we were repairing various defects that they had, and their expectations were so minor. They just wanted to get a little bit of improvement. And it just changed my whole perspective on how to look at life.
Well, the one that I think had the most impact on me was the unfathomable. Yeah,
these chapters are so personal. That was a middle-aged woman who had had a cosmetic procedure, should have been in and out, no big deal, who came in 4 or 5 days post-operatively with a terrible abdominal infection. And we tried to save her, and we're ultimately not able to. And it's just one of those things in medicine. It's this terrible tragedy that as you see it, it's just unfathomable, but there it is right in front of you, and you just have to treat it the best you can.
Right. And I think that follows up well with perspective.
Yeah, and that was, again, the whole idea of how you're looking at life. In that one, it was, I had treated a patient in the operating room for something called DIC, and disseminated intravascular coagulopathy, which is it's an uncontrollable bleed. And we'd somehow saved the patient. And a couple of years later, my own daughter had this very same operation, and she had DIC. And when they came out to tell us that she was bleeding, it all went through my mind of just all the things that could happen. And the fact that there was nothing I could do. I was like any other patient's family.
Right. And these come step by step. Desperation.
Yeah, that's another medical mission chapter. We were down in Nicaragua taking care of kids, and I just made the point that there was no anesthesia consent. There was no discussion. It was just families showing up with their babies and their children with cleft lips. And they were desperate to have them taken care of. And there was a little boy named Jose, the first little boy I had for the week. And they handed me his manila folder. And I looked at the top, and it had his name, and it had his travel arrangements, how he'd gotten to the hospital. It said first day canoe, second day bus. So it took the little mother 2 days to get to the hospital. She had no idea whether or not he'd even be operated on, that he'd be chosen for an operation. And they were just desperate for their children, and just how rewarding it was to take care of those patients.
I can imagine. Equality?
Equality is a great chapter. I was taking care of a billionaire, famous rich man, and he came in with a broken leg, and he wanted an epidural anesthetic, and I felt it wouldn't be safe in that setting. And he insisted on it, and I insisted that he wouldn't get it. And the whole point of the chapter is, if you're rich and famous, you treat those people exactly the same way you treat everyone else. Because if you don't, that means you're treating all the other ones wrong.
Right.
And I prevailed, and we did the general, and the case went bad. And I was so grateful that I had done the general, and he was treated equally, whether he wanted to or whether he wanted to be or not.
Yeah, that's the way to do it.
Yeah.
Allegiance.
I've always said that if you have enough money and enough fame, you're able to buy the worst care in America. And think about Michael Jackson.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Allegiance.
Allegiance is a tough chapter because that deals with the fact that, physicians are all too human. We had a patient who came in, he's in his 80s, he's advanced Alzheimer's, no family, uncommunicative, with catastrophe in his abdomen. And we took him to the operating room in the middle of the night. And I couldn't help but think, wouldn't it be better for him? Wouldn't it be better for all of us if it was just inoperable and we just closed up and we're done? And when you have those thoughts, you're trying to tell yourself that really would be best for everybody. But part of them is just the fact that you're human, and it's 2:00 in the morning, and I'm not going to get back to bed till 5. And can we just end this? And when you find yourself in that situation, having all too human thoughts, you just have to realize your allegiance is to the patient. And no matter what they need, no matter how discomforting it is to you, that's what you have to do.
Yes. And last but not least, grief.
Yes. A lot of this book is what happens in the operating room that people really don't know about. Mm-hmm. And when you have a death in the operating room, it's unspoken that the surgeon trudges off alone to talk to the family while everybody else cleans up. The only exception to that would be if there's some anesthetic catastrophe, in which case the anesthesiologist would go off. But that fortunately never happened to me. And about 15 years before I retired, it dawned on me that maybe the surgeon would like me to go along with him. And the first time I offered to do that, he said, I've never had the anesthesiologist come with me. Yes, please come. And I found that when we had a death and I went with the surgeon, right, it just sharing the grief with the family and all of us together, it just diminished everybody's grief to be able to be as a group to try
support.
To deal with that.
Yeah, support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the book is all about these very human things, the things that bind us together as humans.
Right. I'll say this about your book. One of the reviews, Saving Grace, is transformational. Beautifully written. Dr. Alfery's perspective on life, death, and beyond will change the way you live each day. And when I was rolling through this in preparation, I'm gonna find myself a place to buy your book. So tell me, and
Thank you.
tell my listeners where they can find your book.
Okay, the book again is Saving Grace: What Patients Teach Their Doctors About Life, Death, and the Balance in Between. It's on Amazon and Goodreads and Barnes and Noble. It's on the website of the publisher Wimpfenstock. It gets a little difficult because there's a bunch of books called Saving Grace. Mine is the one with the doctor's hand over a patient's, and they can also get it on the website for the book, and that is savinggracebook.com. Think about the phrase saving grace, add book to it, and you've got savinggracebook.com. And the website will also, it's got an audio excerpt and a little written excerpt and a few things like that.
Right.
And people could contact me if they wish.
Good. Well, we got lucky having you on the show today.
No. I so appreciate you having me.
Well, it's getting ready for something like this. I get chill bumps, and it's some are good, some are bad. This is a good one.
Well, thank you.
It's what unites these chapters is that each explores a component of what makes all of us human. I just had to repeat that again. I'm going to say goodbye to my audience here. Dr. David Alfery, and I have you'll have experience with this particular thing when I talk to people, and when I talk to people, it's always a matter of saying goodbye. Adios.
Bye, John. Thank you.
It is, and it's a good thing, and I've enjoyed it very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.